thinking ahead, like thinking about some of this being political in a little bit that we'll discuss. When I think about voting, when I think about early politics, of my first memories of people voting, my grandmother would like make lunch, including a crock pot. And we would go up to the local elementary school and she would work the polls. And everyone we knew that they were all working the polls. Everybody would kind of hang out and eat, and then they would go vote and they'd come back in and they'd dig into the crock pot. And they didn't really care who you voted for or what was going on. And it was just like part of this bigger piece that was community. And I think that's what's so crazy now. Like, I'm like, can we just get a crock pot?
Dude, if they fed us at the polls, everybody would vote. People will show up for a free meal.
No
That's
kidding.
for sure.
It's so true. And to me, it feels in my memory like a family reunion.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like come so far from that. It's so wild to me.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh,
Do
we're
you
going to the polls.
Do y'all work the polls? Or have you ever done that? Been a poll worker?
No, I have not. Have you? I'm sure
No,
you haven't.
No, I haven't. Have you?
I do it every time. I
Oh,
love
wow.
Get out, really?
it. No, seriously. Yeah, I'll be doing it next Tuesday? Yeah,
Wow.
I'm in the 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. slot. So if they have a crock pot, I'll be there for the proper
You'll
time.
be
But I
down.
don't know if they do
You
or
could
not.
bring some
Right.
tacos or bring your own crock pot.
Wow.
But
I love that. That's really cool. And that's, to me, we're going to get into this, like, so much of your book is like practical. And that's like, to me, a practical way to be involved in a, like, you know, God honoring way is like, I'm just going to show up and serve. Like, I'm just so excited about this book. Like, I want to get
You're
into
really
it.
excited about this book. And I don't know who's more excited, you or my husband.
Yeah.
Who, when he saw the book, because we got the book, we're able to read the book. So thank you for that. Andy immediately took it from me and has spent the week reading it. And I'm like,
Oh,
anyway, well, I guess we can get started.
I would love to get started.
Hello, and welcome to the Almost Amazing podcast from the City Rise Network. Hosted by Jennifer Dennis and produced by me, Justin Kello. We're a podcast that was supposed to be focused on parenting, but we've kind of lost the plot along the way. Honestly, we don't know what this podcast is about, but we talk to incredible people who love Jesus, and our hope is to provide encouragement and fun whenever possible. If our lack of clear direction bothers you, we apologize, but no one is making you listen to this podcast, unless you're married to Jennifer. Andy, thanks for listening.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Almost Amazing podcast. Today is really different and fun and unique, and I'm so excited. Justin is getting our interviews now and doing an amazing job at it. And so today, he got someone that both he and my husband, Andy, are super excited about talking to.
Yeah.
And now I'm excited that you get to experience it as well.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Not much. I will say it's similar to when we talked to, who's the
It
author?
felt exactly like that because we've kind of already had the interview. Can we say that?
Yeah, that's fine. We're talking.
You guys know that we do this part last. Philip Yancey.
Yes, you were so excited about him.
You nerded out. It was so
Yeah.
sweet because you nerded out because you had loved his work so much.
Right.
And I am not as familiar, and I thought you did an amazing job. Your questions were so good because you're like, it has tabs. Look, this will help the viewing audience.
Show it. Yeah.
Look, Justin's book is so tabbed and he has all of his questions. He did such a good job. And I don't have the book because Andy took it and read it. I should have put Andy in
Andy
here
should have
today.
been the
I was
co-host
like,
today.
Andy, are you sure you don't want to go? Are
Andy
you
should
sure?
have been the co-host.
So
You did do a great job, and you had great questions. And I
will say that this is going to come out the day after the election.
Yeah.
But can we just get to the election,
Yeah, I feel you.
Justin?
I feel you.
I'm so exhausted with it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of you out there are like, well, I'm not even listening. I'm not even
Mhm.
engaged. And man, congratulations.
Are you
I'm
voting
a
early?
little engaged. I need to look up.
Dude, last time I voted on election, it took me like 3 hours. I'm never doing this
I cannot
again.
wait till election day. Yes, I have to vote early.
gonna
I have
vote
to get it out of the way.
Yeah.
The other thing is we were visiting with Olivia last night. We went up to visit her for Andy's birthday. Let me just say, no shade on Olivia, but we drove 3 hours to see this kid for Andy's birthday. Justin, she like had a piece of pizza with us. And then she's like, all right, you guys want to drop me off? I got some stuff going on. And I'm
Wow.
like, what?
Wow.
Ice cream?
Yeah.
Hugs?
Yeah.
Tour?
Mhm.
No.
We were all like that. We were
all like that, including me.
Could not see.
You can't see. And as an adult, you're like, obviously we wanted to be here because she'd be really sad if she missed her dad's birthday.
Mhm.
But at the same time, you're like, but she'd be really sad if we kept her from her plans.
Right.
Anyway, so she's figuring out how to vote. She is so pumped about voting. And
so is she registered here or is she registered there? How does
she has
it work?
no idea. She doesn't know. She's got to figure it out. I'm like, you've got to figure this out.
So she might be coming home next
Whether
week.
you're going to do absentee ballot, you're coming in town to get your vote cast. She goes, we're all so pumped. We're all so excited to vote.
Wow, there you go.
And so I thought that was really cool. It'll be her
That's
first
exciting.
selection.
Yeah.
How are things with you?
Great. My daughter's not voting yet, but she is playing softball. So that's like our life. And I just got to say, I'm going to scar my children in many different ways, but being a sports dad is not one of them. I just don't care. I'm like, great job. I don't know what's going on. I don't care if you're doing it right. I don't care if you're doing it wrong. I do care if you're disrespectful to your coach. That's important to me. You know, I want you to, they're volunteering. Please listen to them. But like these parents that are just like on the sidelines telling them, choke up on the bat and scoot up.
But are they really already doing that?
Oh, yeah.
No.
They're not aggressive, but they're trying to tell their kid how to do it. They're not fighting with the ref. They're trying to coach their kid from the sidelines. Wow. And I'm like, there's a lot of things I don't know well as a parent. I feel like I'm in a great space on the sports field. I'm like,
I think
good job. Great. Everybody had fun. I'm glad that you got your snow cone. Like I don't have this need to coach her up on the sideline.
I think that's really healthy because that only gets worse.
Yeah.
And by the time you're in high school, when you have a parent come undone on their kid on the court, you're just like, man.
Yeah. Fortunately, I haven't seen any of that like aggression, but I think it starts with coaching and then parents trying to coach and then it turns into something more. So this season is very much like, well, why don't you check up on the bat, sweetie? Just, you know, they're very kind about it.
Olivia did club and and this is what I want to say about club. I believe sometimes that club is the one that makes you believe that your child could be a D1 student if only they would ...
Right.
And all of those dots involve intense commitment, coaching, money. And I think somewhere that's when their brain starts to switch when they're like, oh, this is my kid learning all these skills. And like, oh, this is my kid that might go to college for free.
Yeah.
This is a possible $150,000 ticket.
Yes. I could see why that's hard. Like if you are worried about paying for college, you could put some pressure.
Then there's this new brain.
I don't know. We're not there yet. We're not there yet.
Oh, that's exciting. Softball. That's so fun.
And the weather's cooling off a little bit, so it's not as miserable.
Amen.
To go to a softball game.
I love evenings now. Eating dinner outside right now is the fit. It's perfect. Well, speaking of perfect, we do have the perfect guest today. It's going to be an amazing visit, and we hope you guys enjoy. Well, we are excited today to have an author and a pastor here to talk about politics, everybody, because we're not tired of it yet. No, I'm kidding. We're not talking about politics. But let me introduce our guest for today is Steve Bezner, author, pastor, and author of the new book that's come out, Your Jesus is Too American. And I love that title.
The title is evocative.
Because is Jesus not American? Am I the only one just finding out about that?
You might be. So before we get into the book, I want to know about just to hear your faith written about in a book, you get to know a lot about a person. Like you really bared your soul. So I want to know a little bit about just how you became a Christian and just brief how you became a pastor.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Well, thanks for having me on today, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm excited about it and really looking forward to it. So I became a Christian really just because I was raised in a family that were all believers. I was raised going to First Baptist Church of Gainesville, Texas, which is it's kind of a traditional Baptist church in a small town in North Texas, right on the Texas-Oklahoma border. Whenever I was 6 years old, I got baptized, came to faith. I had the faith of a 6-year-old. I would definitely say that whenever I was a teenager, probably about 14 or 15, I think was really when I began to understand and comprehend the gospel. But I have been in one manner or another following the Lord since then. Because church has always been a big part of my life, it's maybe not too surprising that I became a pastor, but my parents were divorced when I was young, and I primarily lived with my mom, and for most of that time, and the men in that church just became really kind of second fathers in a lot of ways during that season, and I think that maybe that's one of the things that the Lord used to draw me into pastoring. So whenever I was 18, I was graduating high school, about to go off to college. I actually thought I was going to go major in political science and become a politician and that kind of a thing. But just as I was preparing, the Lord just really called me into ministry at that senior year. And so I changed my direction and haven't looked back. So that's kind of been it. And
Wow.
it's been something that's been a great joy for me. So I've really enjoyed it.
That's such a cool switch to maybe think politics and then go into ministry.
Yeah.
It's a pivot. That's a pivot right there.
It's a little bit of a pivot. It really is. Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but I ran for politics in my college because I was thinking about politics.
You were thinking about being a politician?
Yes, I was thinking about being in politics. We were in the College of the Republicans, and this was back in the day. And and we were we got to meet politicians. They would come and meet us.
Did you win?
I won.
Wow.
I won. I did. And then I
did it.
followed a boy to another school.
Wow. Okay. Well, that
And
makes sense.
he ended up being in the ministry.
That tracks.
But I think that's such an incredible journey. My question is, so now you've got this heart for politics. You're seeing what's happened. What was the point where you're like, we've got to write about this? Because what I feel is I remember the moment when I was like, this is becoming really weird that my faith is becoming really close and ingrained in politics. Like it felt different. It felt really like American. I don't know. And I don't want to offend people, but it felt more like we were worshiping a person that was political rather than this being about Christ. What was the point where you thought, I've got to write a book. We've got to dig into this?
Yeah, so I think that I don't know how unique my story is, but I mean, probably from the time I was called into ministry, and for some time, what I thought was that politics and faith. At first, I thought they really shouldn't have anything to do with one another. Then you begin to realize, man, my faith has to inform the way that I engage the world. But I wasn't really sure what to do with that because I could sort of see overlap on social issues, but I couldn't really see overlap on other issues. And a lot of politics were about issues that I didn't understand overlap. As I began to read the New Testament and understand Jesus' teaching on the kingdom, and I began to say, oh, the kingdom is not just something that happens whenever we are in heaven, but the kingdom is something that is this reality that God wants us to be part of. And whenever I began to discover that, I think that I really then was like, oh, okay, so my faith is to help inform a new reality that we're supposed to be participating in. So it's not just when I die one day, I'm going to go to heaven. It's that while I'm here, God wants me to be part of his plan, which is redeeming all things. So whenever Jesus says that our prayer ought to be on earth as it is in heaven, then it's like, oh, well, I need to participate in that redemption here and now. So that was when it began to shift. What I began to notice was that as a pastor, a lot of my family and a lot of my congregation were being discipled more by social media, YouTube, cable news than they were by what Jesus had taught. And I just thought, okay, if this is the reality, I mean, if these are the discipling forces, then we've got to really recenter on what it is that Jesus has called the church to be. And that, with that kind of kingdom vision, sort of came together. And so that was where the book came from. So it kind of went from this long road of politics and faith are not related at all the way to the way that we engage the world in every way is sort of political, even if it's not dealing with a candidate. It's political in the sense that we're trying to craft this reality that Jesus wants to participate in.
One of the things that senior pastors have the privilege to do is they can work through these thoughts with real life people in their sermons and in their writings. And so you mentioned that a little bit in your book. I'd love to hear about that process of kind of approaching some of these topics with your church and what that experience was like.
Yeah, I mean, I want to just first say my church is incredible. They've been very gracious because I really would say that I've been learning a lot of this in real time and figuring it out. And so as I've been teaching it and walking through it, I've definitely made some missteps. But the church has been very gracious and kind of gone on the journey with me and helped me understand that. And what's been really cool has been that as we've discussed these things and as we've explored them, then the congregation has been able to sort of test them, so to speak, out in the real world. And so people come back and they say, hey, this idea of the kingdom, it worked in my school where I was teaching, or this idea of the kingdom, I carried it into my office and it really made a big difference. And then now that we've got an election coming up, people are thinking, oh, wow, I really feel like this time around on this particular election, I'm looking at the election through more of a kingdom lens. And so I'm beginning to really understand the issues in a new way, in a fresh way. So I think all of those things have been really helpful. So I agree totally. Having a church is a big help.
Which topic, not was the most contentious, I'm not asking that question. Which topic, because you talk about race, sexuality, politics, all these things, which brought the most fruit or the most exciting conversations between you and your people?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, probably the one that is the most pastoral is the chapter on suffering, which is definitely not the one that is the hot button issue, but man, everybody walks through it. And so that's the one that definitely connects with people. But outside of that, I would say the race conversation is the one that it is probably the most quote unquote contentious. I think that it's contentious because I'm in a church that is majority Anglo, and I think that it can come across whenever we talk about race that we are saying that people are implicitly racist. And I don't want to ever insinuate that. I think that it was the idea that we should be open to, yearning for, earnestly praying for our church to look like our community. And we live in Houston, and Houston looks like the world. And so I think that I probably made a lot of missteps in that area, but learned a lot. And I would say now we're in a pretty healthy place as a church with regards to that topic.
One of my first knowledge of you existing was in the pandemic. A friend of mine invited me to a racial reconciliation presentation that you and a couple other guys were doing here locally. And it was like in the middle of the pandemic. I don't think you could be there because you were like autoimmune kind of in danger. But like I saw you on the screen and I was like, and the guys you were working with, and I learned so much in that day. Like that itself should be a book. All the work that you and those guys put together, just to talk about not only the national issues with racial reconciliation, but just really honed in on our city specifically. It was really eye opening. So I just want to thank you for that. I wish you'd write a whole book about that because it was.
Thanks.
I was like, I got to follow this guy and everything. And so I started stalking you. And so now I know everything about you.
That's good. That's healthy. No red flags here. My husband feels the same way. Andy Dennis, he's the Baptist student minister at Rice University. And I think he's reached out to you because he was trying to create some conversations between in some of the Middle East situations. A lot of those students are involved at Rice, and he loves your perspective on peace and being able to communicate and heal and move forward. So you've also been a great minister to him as well. I think we're going to see you soon. I think we're going to see you at the BGCT gathering in November.
Are you speaking?
I think he's speaking, and I think Andy got us tickets.
Wow.
I think
there
you're
you go.
at a ticketed event now at the BGCT.
Yeah, there's a thing that's on, I think, Sunday night that they've asked me to speak at. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah. We'll be there. We're looking forward to it.
In your book, you say, we have too often focused on production values and creating experiences rather than considering how we might faithfully and communally live the kingdom in the public square so that others can see Jesus. I'm looking for some practical tips on what are 2 or 3 things that the average Christian can do to live that out in the public square that you've seen.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So I think that, all of us at our churches, we're working on trying to do quote unquote relevant things, right? So we got to look cool. We got to have a good design. We got to be on social media. We got to do et cetera, et cetera. And I think that those are helpful. Like, I don't want to ever act like those don't matter. I just think that the average person probably doesn't discover a church because of their social media page. Mm-hmm. The average person goes to a church's social media page because they encounter someone living an authentically Christian life in the world. So I think that one of the things that we can do to be obedient in the public square is just to talk about our faith in a way that's, non-confrontational, but joyful. I think that's probably the simplest thing that we can do. I also think that whenever we do post on social media, to do so in a way that is joyful, that is humanizing, particularly whenever we're surrounding or engaging contentious topics, I think it's always really helpful as well. I also think that if a person is doing this on their own, if they look for ways to know their neighbors, love their neighbors, and serve their neighbors, people are always intrigued by that. So I can just give you a couple of examples. We'll do things like, hey, this week, everybody on Thursday night, walk your street, knock on the door, or if you see neighbors out and about, just say, hey, my name's Steve. I live at this house. I'm just out praying for my neighbors tonight. How can I pray for you guys? people are blown away by that. Why would you do that? How would you do that? That kind of thing. And so I think that just little examples of faithfulness, it doesn't have to be I'm preaching a sermon. It doesn't have to be that I'm looking to make a grand pronouncement on social media. I just think that whenever we live those ways of faithfulness, people are intrigued by that, because ordinary faithfulness is often the thing that is most missing in not just Christianity, but in a lot of faith contexts. So whenever we do that publicly, I believe that people are drawn in, and that's when they start to investigate and ask questions.
Wow. Well,
That's great.
Specifically, since we're talking about it's being election season, as this post, I think the election's already happened. Throughout your book, you weave this idea of prayer and service, like the way Christians can be in the public square and do these sorts of things and live out the kingdom life is wrapped up in prayer and service. So specifically related to the political, environment we live in, what are the acts of service and what are the types of prayers you see people that they could do?
Yeah, that's great. So I think that whenever congregations gather together to pray for their community, God brings things to mind. So one of the things that we'll do regularly as a congregation, I'm sure you do similar things at your church, but we'll gather together several times a year just to have a very focused time of prayer and worship. No real teaching, but it's just, hey, we're going to lean in, we're going to pray together, and we'll pray for areas in the community that we know are broken. Oftentimes, whenever we pray for things like addictions or our local schools or whatever we're praying for, people will be burdened from the Lord to say, I want to engage in some way to help with this. And whenever God puts it on someone's heart, then that's where ideas are born. So I would say whenever we start with prayer, then people are normally moved by the Holy Spirit to engage in some way. And then we just sort of let God lead and show us what to do. So I'll just tell you some things that have come up in our context, but it might be totally different in Westview. But so, for instance, we have a ton of folks in our part of town who need help learning English. They have immigrated here from a different part of the world. And because we're in Houston, they can usually navigate in whatever their native language is, but they want to know English. And so we started a free ESL class that meets on Tuesday nights at our church, uses scripture to teach English. So we have the opportunity to tell people about Jesus. But then as a part of that, then there's all kinds of helps that are provided to allow people to navigate. So it's kind of this navigate American culture. So there's this sort of overlap, right? Where it's, well, we're helping you with a practical service, but also we're showing you who Jesus is. And if you're curious, we can answer those questions for you. Another thing that's come up, I've already mentioned schools, but we do a lot of mentoring in local schools and engaging in local schools, at-risk kids, or providing supplies or needs that come up within the local school, praying with principals, praying with counselors, demonstrating that we are long-term partners, not just showing up to do a project, but we're with you. As we begin to show those things, then you begin to build and gain influence. And the goal is not to gain influence, but as you gain influence, then people want to know, well, why are you doing these things? And you have the opportunity, again, to tell people about who Jesus is and why he's made a difference in your life. Sadly, we've become pretty good at responding to natural disasters. I'm sure that you guys have as well. But, whenever you have hurricanes on the regular or, whatever kind of windstorm moves through, as you begin to build those teams and you show up, I don't know what the experiences you guys have had, but, in the wake of Harvey, when we're going around knocking on doors, mudding out homes, this kind of stuff, people are initially suspicious because they assume that you're about to charge them an arm and a leg to help them. Then whenever they realize you're from a church, people would say to us over and over, well, how much is this going to cost? And, they assume it's going to be at a deep discount. When you say, well, we're just doing it for free because we want to help our neighbors, people are blown away. I mentioned this in the book, but, one of my favorite stories is after Harvey, one of the senior adult men in our congregation was at Kroger. He saw a woman wearing a hijab who was buying some supplies that led him to believe that her house had been flooded. So he approached her, said, sorry to bother you. Just wanted to see if you need any help mudding out your house. To which she then said, oh, thanks so much. But a group of people from a church called Houston Northwest have already been to our house and mudded it out. And if we would have known, or I think the way she put it was, I think if people knew that this is how Christians were, everybody would want to be a Christian. I think that just that kind of radical, freely given love in the spirit of service it's so uncommon that it catches people off guard. And I think it encourages them to give Jesus a second look.
Amen. I think that's a powerful story. And I love, I guess my question is, how do we know the signs in our own life when we're allowing politics or the rhetoric to sort of steal or capture our hope,
identity,
or our identity. I remember my parents, they're more conservative. They would be, they would say that. And I remember sitting in the living room when Bill Clinton beat, I believe, George Sr. 41. And it was I don't remember the year of the election. It was like probably 90 something. But I remember when that happened and my mom just sat there and like just cried. And she said, Jennifer, I just don't know if there's any hope for our nation.
And then 8 years later, she's alive and well.
It's like, she's great. She's great. That's why I no longer lose my mind in elections. Right. We've been through so many now that you're just like, oh, we'll be fine. But for these people, like, what are the flags where people are out of sorts and you think they're maybe out of balance with their identity in politics? And then what's your message when the outcome is not what they want and they are dealing with this devastating blow of moving forward? Like, what is your message to them? Because we're waking up possibly knowing, they're listening to this podcast, possibly knowing what's happened. What's your word to them?
Yeah, great question. So I think the red flags for me, whenever I reach a point that I am living as if the election of someone will sway the outcome of the world, then I'm probably teetering on unhealth. So this is what I mean by that. I never want people to hear me say that elections don't matter, because of course I think elections matter. And I never want people to hear me say that politics don't matter or don't be civically engaged. I certainly believe that we ought to be civically engaged. I think that Christians should be engaged. I just think that if we truly believe in the lordship of Jesus and in the sovereignty of God, then we should be engaged, but we should also trust that whatever has happened has passed through God's sovereign hand, and that we can trust the lordship of Jesus, that he is moving things in a direction that he wants to move them. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always going to be pleasant for us. It doesn't mean that we should withdraw. But I do think that if I reach a point where I am convinced that whatever is happening in the world is beyond God's sovereignty, then I think I've moved too far. So again, it's that weird balance in a lot of life. Work as hard as you can and then trust God with the results. And I think that, that way, civically and politically, anybody that, wants to have those kind of private conversations, I'll have them, I'll talk to them. I try to work diligently in my community. I try to be involved, but then at the end of the day, I can't control the results, and I have to trust the Lord, and I have to believe that God knows. And to me, being a Christian ought to give you assurance and peace. You can say, okay, right. I know that God's sovereign over all of this, but that's not always easy for folks to do today, because we hear from so many corners that if Kamala wins, it's the end. If Trump wins, it's the end. And the truth of the matter is let's pretend that it is the end. That whoever is elected, then democracy begins to fall apart, or whatever the doomsday scenario is. And if we experience that, well, that would be tragic, but it doesn't mean that the Lord's not still sovereign. So I do think that putting my hope in Jesus, focusing on being a faithful presence in my church, that's where I have the opportunity in most cases to make the greatest difference. My vote matters, but probably the thing that'll matter the most is being faithful locally.
So in your book, you've kind of got this man woven through a couple of the different chapters, a guy named Bob Roberts. And I was immediately like, oh, this guy's important. I want to know more about him, where that relationship came from and what it meant to you. And then also, what if someone's looking for that type of influence in their life? How do they find it? Yeah.
So in 2008, I was feeling the call to plant a church. And through a long series of events, I ended up at a conference at Saddleback Church in California. And the first speaker was Rick Warren, and Pastor Rick, who everybody knows, stands up and he talks about the church being the hope of the world in the 21st century. And I was like, okay, I'm feeling good. And then the next speaker was Bob Roberts, who's from Keller, Texas. So actually not that far
yeah.
away.
Yeah.
I've been in one of his
Yeah.
services.
Oh, really?
Yes, I've been to his church.
Okay, yeah. So I was like, man, I've never heard this guy. And he just started casting a vision for church and church planting that I had never heard before. It was like, what did I just hear? So I tracked him down online. I went to a training that he was holding in Keller. It was a 1 day, they called it a turbo training. And I went, and he taught on the kingdom of God, being a church that lived for the kingdom. And it was one of those moments where my protons were completely rearranged. I mean, I just walked out of there and was like, what in the world just happened? So I read all of his books, and basically they had another turbo like 3 months later. So I just went back to it. And the guys who were there were like, didn't you already come to this? And I was like, well, I did, but it just really is messing with me. So I'm thinking about it some more. And then I wanted to take my wife. So I went back a third time, and then they were kind of making fun of me. They were like, okay, what are you doing here? I was like, I'm just trying to figure this out, trying to understand it. And so then basically Bob was just very kind to me. You know, these turbos, there weren't a lot of people there. There were like maybe 20 people, 30 people. And so he just was very kind to me and said, hey, you know, let's start a conversation. So he just kind of became an unofficial mentor. He ended up training me in church planting. And I've just had the opportunity to really learn a ton from him over the years. And then whenever I became the pastor of Houston Northwest, I really just began to try to take this kingdom mindset, this kingdom DNA that I'd learned from Bob, and just plant it in. So now that's my story. Now, the question you asked, the second half, you know, where do people find that? I mean, I think it's always just, where is it that whenever you hear someone speaking, it jars you awake, and you go, and I want to be clear. I think we all hear a lot of great preachers. You know, I mean, I'll hear preachers all the time. I'm like, man, that was good. But this experience was different. It was like, I heard Bob speak and I went, I don't know what that was. Like I have never understood following Jesus in that way before. And it was so compelling to me that I had to know more. I think when you find those sorts of voices, that you should take that to be the Holy Spirit prompting you. And I think track that down. So whenever you find that, I would just say, reach out to those folks, try to see if you can meet with them, listen to them, you know, that kind of stuff. And I think go from there. And I think whenever you do that, I think that you can find, you know, just some help along the way. Now, that all being said, I would also say that sometimes the best mentors and voices are, you know, just people that you see every Sunday at your church. So, you know, maybe there's a couple of different voices that we need, but that's kind of what happened in my life.
What I love about that story is a lot of times we think that mentorships and friendships and intentional kind of partnerships happen organically, and you put in some work to make this happen. And so I appreciate that, because a lot of times you'll ask somebody like, well, no, I just, you know, we met each other and we hit it off, man, and now we're best friends. Like, not everybody has that experience of being able to just have an organic, meaningful like partnership or mentorship situation. So I love that you took it on yourself. Like, I got to hear from this guy as best as I can. And I appreciate that perspective, because a lot of times I feel that we think that, well, if God wants me to have a mentor, he'll send them my way. They'll just drop in my lap. And that may be true, and that does happen, but it also doesn't happen sometimes. And so that's really a good word. One last thing I want to touch on before we let you go. I love the idea of generosity presented in this book. It also echoes a lot of what our senior pastor talks about. He really talks about God being the first and most generous giver, and how that is really an incredible way to show off the kingdom and to really show what it means to follow Jesus. So where did that teaching come from in your life? And what are some ways the average Christian can put that on display?
Yeah, I really think that the idea of God being generous, like I said, I was raised in church. So the idea of giving wasn't something that was new to me. It was as I got a broader view of the world and began to understand really just how blessed, just how wealthy we are from a global perspective, that whenever I would hear people like Rich Stern speak, who was at the time, you know, the president of World Vision, for Rich to say things like, you know, the Bible has 2,000 verses that talk about the poor, the indigent, and the immigrant, and we ought to probably think about that and he would say things like, we form entire theologies on topics that have 3 verses. So if God put something in the Bible 2,000 times, we probably ought to pay attention to that. Well, that really convicted me. And so I just kind of started doing some individual study. And then, our church would take these trips to places like Latin America, South America, Africa, and we would, begin looking around, and I would say, wow, we probably could do a lot of good in a lot of settings if we were generous. And that just opened up my eyes to people in our local context who, because it's expensive to live in a city in the United States, it's expensive to live in Houston. Even if you're employed, it can be challenging to make it. And so I began to become aware of things like ALICE. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this scale. I was not, but asset limited, income constrained. And so the ALICE scale are people who are above the poverty line, but they do not have enough funds because even though they're employed, they don't have enough funds to really earn a livable wage. But because they're above a certain threshold, they don't usually qualify for federal assistance. And so they're sort of in this difficult place where they're employed, they're working, but they're always behind and they're always trying to catch up. And so we just began to think about spaces like that. How can we help people who are employed but need more, that we can help kind of bridge that gap? Or how could we provide job training opportunities? Or how could we connect folks to services that can help them get a job? And what we began to discover is that a lot of the social ills that we're concerned about from a kingdom perspective are often intertwined with poverty. And so if you can help people move out of poverty through employment, through education, through whatever means, then you can actually change 10 other things in their lives. And, it's just not something that we love to talk about. But if we can help people get into a space where they're out of poverty, then we can really see some incredible things happen.
Well, I love that in your book, you mentioned this moment where your understanding of poverty fundamentally shifted. It was when your friend got his debit card stolen and that person went and bought like Taco Bell and formula or something like that. And you said,
yeah.
It was a great story. And it resonated with me because what you just talked about was kind of my moment. I went on a mission trip to Philadelphia as a young youth pastor. And I remember we were in the government assisted housing and just kind of doing some projects and things like that. And I just always had this idea of like, if it's so bad, why don't they leave? If it's so bad, why don't people leave where they are? Just totally ignorant. And that conversation came up and a woman 20 years older than me said, I've been trying to leave for 15 years. I literally can't make enough to get out of this place. And I was like, whoa. And so talking about, your understanding of poverty shifting, I resonated because I had that moment. I've had that moment where I thought one way and it changed. And I think when people have that moment, it's hard for them not to have a heart for those in need.
And that story that you referenced, Justin, I'm sorry. I was just going to say it was crazy to me because, he's telling me this story, my friend Joel, and I'm thinking that he's trying to tell me oh man, there's so much crime, right? I got mugged and, then they used my debit card and I'm totally missing the point of the story. And in it, he said, or as part of that story, he says to me, well, you know what they used it on, right? And so I'm like, well, they couldn't have used it on drugs. I mean, drug dealers don't take debit cards, right? So I'm like, I guess alcohol. And he's like, no, man, they went to Taco Bell and then they bought diapers.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa. And it just, it blew my mind.
Yeah. When God blesses us with those moments of clarity, it changes how you view those things. Man, that's good. We don't want to keep you too much longer. We try and land the plane with kind of a fun question at the end. I will say this, there are 2 people on social media that lead the kind of global church, kind of, public figure Christians that I really think they get it on Twitter and Threads. And it's you and it's Beth Moore.
Oh. Well, thanks. Hey, anytime I can hang out with Beth Moore, I'll take it.
Well, we've gotten to the real reason we brought you here is we want Beth Moore to be on our show. So if you could just connect us, that'd be great.
Hook us up. That would be
great. But
great.
I bring that up because I know via Twitter and now Threads, I know that you've got a real passion for food, for Texas food in particular. And so my question, we'll answer this too. If you had to eat one type of food, genre of food, whatever, for the rest of your life, what would it have to be? And so we'll go first for sure. Give me some. Oh, you already got an answer. Okay. You want to go?
Oh, I'm ready. I'm ready. Go for it. I've this is the Super Bowl I've been training for all my life. I'm ready. But no, for me, it's definitely going to be a taco. I love barbecue, but you can you can put barbecue in your taco.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can have any kind of taco. That's what I'm going with.
Dude, I knew it was going to be barbecue or taco because I follow you. That like you're either smoking a brisket or you were talking about how good tacos were you had last night. Like that, you're just so real in that space of like you'll talk about Jesus and then you'll talk about your favorite band from the 60s you're listening to or whatever. Like it's just a really relatable presentation that you're giving kind of a glimpse of your life. For me, I think because barbecue is so heavy, I could not commit to that for the rest of my life. I think I would die in 5 years. I think there's enough variety in Tex-Mex that you could eat semi-healthily if you kind of commit to that lane. The other one that wouldn't work, I think, is like Italian food, unless it's like a real Italian food because they don't have all the preservatives we have. But American Italian food, I think if I committed to that, it'd kill me. So I think Tex-Mex would be mine.
Sure. Yeah, me too. Mexican. Yeah, I love Mexican. I eat it often. So it's great. So
we're Texans right here. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, there's
exactly.
No doubt.
Yeah. Well, before we go, where can people connect with you? Where do they need to look for the book? Like, what's the best way to get plugged in with your ministry?
Yeah, you bet. So you can find the book anywhere that you can buy books, so any, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the publisher itself, Baker Bookhouse, bookshop.org, any of those. Social media, I'm most active on Instagram at @Bezner or on Twitter /X @Bezner and Threads @SBezner. So that's where you can find it.
I was so thankful when I moved over to Threads. I didn't, you don't have a 1-for-1 follow on Twitter or whatever. And the algorithm knew I cared about you and you just showed up again on Threads. So I was like, great. I left Twitter and now I've got my same guy over here. So man, that's good. Well, that's all we have for you. We're just thankful for your time. Is there anything else you want to share before we close up?
No, I just really appreciate you guys doing this. Thanks for asking me to be part of the show. And I really appreciate you guys and all that you're doing. So thanks so much.
All right, everybody. What an amazing show. We hope you've had an amazing time on the Almost Amazing podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Almost Amazing podcast from the City Rise Network based in Houston, Texas. City Rise is a partnership of church campuses, nonprofits, and missionaries devoted to lifting our city and the world by generously giving the gospel of Jesus Christ. For more information or to find a church campus close to you in the Houston area, visit cityrise.org.